guys, and welcome to the Truth Conversation with Bill Scott. Tonight I've got my good buddy, awesome guy with me, Ted Wright, who is an archaeologist. We're going to bring him on here in just a second. Just want to first say thank you for following us. Thank you for all the subscribers. We've almost broke 300 on the channel, and that's amazing. Thank you for all of your support. Hopefully we'll look back at this next year and say we've almost broke 3,000. That's what we're shooting for. So if you haven't liked and subscribed, go ahead and do that, but I'm not going to waste any time here. We're going to bring my good friend, the real Indiana Jones, I call him, Ted Wright, on here, and he's going to tell us tonight a little bit about archaeology, what he does, and yeah, he's just such an interesting guy. Whoops. Oh, there he is. Oh, there's two of me and one of him. That's scary. Let's try to fix this. There we go. Try that again. There's Ted. Hey, Ted, how's it going, buddy?
Hey, Bill. Great to be back on, brother.
Yeah. Glad to have you back here, man. And this meeting is not nearly as fun as our last meeting. I loved hanging out with this guy in Chicago it was last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was last year. Yeah.
Yeah, the man.
You missed the cold weather, don't you?
Hey, Kentucky, like we know what cold weather is a little bit. Not anything like Chicago, but yeah. I do miss the burgers and I miss the pizza up there for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
And
Yeah, Chicago's pizza is the best. We have good hot dogs as well. Chicago hot dogs are great.
Yeah, but the pizza though. I mean, I just come back for the and the art museum, like, great recommend. And and you've got the the center there at Wheaton. What's it called? The
Marion Wade Center. Yes.
Marion Wade. So a lot of things for archaeologists to do there. The Marion Wade Center, guys, has the original writing desks of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, and you got to check that out if you're ever in the Chicagoland area.
It's fantastic. Yeah, if you're ever in Chicago, you definitely have to visit Wheaton College, and there's a lot to see there. But then also the city has a lot of great museums. The Art Institute of Chicago, and the Field Museum has all the dinosaurs in it, and Museum of Science and Industry. Just it's museum-rich city for sure.
Sure, it sure is, man, and it always helps to have a tour guide. So look Ted up if you're up there. If we don't rescue him down here to Texas, maybe in the next year or so, we'll talk. Ted serves as the founder and executive director of epicarchaeology.org. That's epicarchaeology.org. Go check that website out. There's a lot of cool stuff on there. He has a BA in Anthropology and Archaeology from the Cobb Institute of Archaeology at Mississippi State University. Southern boy. So, MA in Christian Apologetics with concentration in philosophy from SES, Southern Evangelical Seminary, and there he served as a graduate research assistant, if I can talk tonight, graduate research assistant for Dr. Norman Geisler. And if you guys know who that name is, if you don't know who that name is and you're interested in apologetics, you need to just repent and go find out who Norm Geisler is. So Ted's been around. As a matter of fact, just last week, what were you doing last week, Ted? You're in LA for something.
I was in sunny Los Angeles filming for the History Channel. It was really terrible getting away from all this cold, negative digit temperature here in Chicago.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, this guy's this guy's the real deal, man. He's been on the History Channel. He's always doing things. We'll be talking on Facebook and be like, hey, man, pray next week. I'm going across the world for something. So, so there's so much so much more I could say, but I'll just turn it over to Ted. What do we need to know about Ted Wright? Why did you get into archaeology? Why archaeology?
Well, that's a great question, Bill. It's so great to be with you, brother. And thank you for what you're doing, man. You're doing such great work there in Houston, and, having a global impact with what you're doing, and, mission work, and, just all the great stuff you're doing. So I appreciate your friendship, brother, and your kindred spirit and kindred heart for the gospel, brother. That's really just awesome. And I just praise God for that. So the short story is basically, I grew up, of course, in the South, and I got involved in scouting at a fairly early age. I was in Cub Scouts, and then became a Webelow, if you guys know what Webelows are, and then became a Boy Scout. And I was really fortunate enough I grew up in the Memphis, Tennessee area, so East Tennessee, or excuse me, West Tennessee, right there near Mississippi, Arkansas, and Tennessee, sort of on that border. And so there's a lot of historical sites there. There's a very famous Civil War battlefield in April of 1862 called Shiloh. And I took many trips to Shiloh, and it was there probably at Shiloh at the Civil War battlefield that originally took place in April of 1862, one of the bloodiest battles of the U.S. Civil War. And it was there that really my interest in history really started to develop. And then it sort of just stayed with me for a long time. And so my plan was to get my degree in ancient history, and then go on and teach ancient history. And then a little bit of a tweak with that, because joined the U.S. Air Force. I wanted to see the world. So I joined the U.S. Air Force and got to do some really cool stuff. But my pastor, actually, I was getting ready to get out and go to finish my degree in ancient history. And he said, I got these magazines I want you to check out. And it turns out it was Biblical Archaeology Review magazine. And I took those home. It was a big stack of them. And I didn't know that you could actually, get a degree in archaeology. Really, I guess you thought you could, but I just didn't know, exactly which direction. As it turns out, the school where I was attending had a degree in anthropology and archaeology. So that really got me into archaeology, where I really joined my passion for the scripture, the Old Testament, New Testament, with actually going and finding physical evidence for it and studying it in its original language, its original culture, and that just really made the world of scripture come alive for me. And I have not stopped. My interest and my enthusiasm for it has not stopped in 25, 30 years. It's only gotten more intense, I guess, because the more you dig into it, pardon the pun, the more fascinating it becomes. And it's like all these mysteries that you want to solve. And there's still a lot of amazing mysteries out there. And I'm actually really been blessed to be a part of researching one of those in the past 5 years, more specifically. And really, I've been involved in it indirectly for about 12 years. But the past 5 years, I've been really investigating a very interesting question in Turkey. Some people may, of course, the story of Noah's Ark, and we have a site we're looking at. Fascinating. That's all I can say about it. And right now, we just don't have enough data. And archaeology is not treasure hunting; it's science, and we want to actually do scientific tests on everything that we look at. So in a nutshell, that's really kind of what got me started. And then in 2017, I started Epic Archaeology to really bring academic archaeology to the average person, so that they can sort of share in these amazing discoveries. And there are 2 or 3 great ministries out there that are doing work, and I'm really blessed to be a part of. One of them is Associates for Biblical Research. I got involved with them quite a few years ago, and was able to serve as assistant square supervisor for a season there at Kerbadel Makader in the West Bank. And anyway, just an amazing site and amazing place, and just been very blessed. I just say God is a God of grace, and been very blessed to get to do some amazing things. And I'm just grateful to be here with you today, Bill.
Yeah, it sounds like you've really done some cool stuff, man. Well, you have, and you've been. I love. Ted has been one of our favorite guests to have for our Ratio Christi chapter. As some of you guys know, we have a ministry called Ratio Christi that reaches out to college students primarily, but we have some townies that come too, and they and they do. It's pretty cool work, and we'll bring in guys like Ted to talk to us about archaeology and apologetics. He's been one of our favorite guests. Our students always love having a Zoom call with Ted. So this is so it's really cool. I'm glad to have you here too, Ted. It's always a fun conversation. So for those who've never heard that term apologetics, if they've followed this channel long enough, they've probably understood what apologetics is. That's defending the faith of Jesus Christ, looking at the sound evidence for Christianity. And so obviously archaeology is going to play a large role in that. So in what ways have you found that archaeology has opened up doors to people's minds and really made the faith real for some people? Both skeptics and Christians, I think, really need that. So in your experience, has archaeology paid some big dividends in ministry when you're able to present these things to people?
Absolutely. I think so. I mean, it's not, for some people, it's never enough. For some people, it sort of helps pave the way. And Bill, I have taught seminary and Bible college for goodness, probably collectively about maybe 14, 15 years. And when I teach apologetics, one of the things that I do is I ask my students, what is the single most important doctrine in the New Testament? And of course, that would be the resurrection, the historical bodily resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And I know that you've had Mike Lacona on, and he teaches there at HCU as well. Does some great work with New Testament history. And so the question of the resurrection is of vital importance to the New Testament and to us as believers. So the question is, can archaeology prove the resurrection? The answer is no, but it's a qualified no, and I'll explain. So the resurrection is a miracle. It's in the miraculous realm, but that resurrection was mitigated to us, or it comes down to us through a historical document that we call the New Testament. And so archaeology can really serve as an incredible ally for the New Testament in showing us the New Testament is historically reliable. Essentially, we have with any history at all, whether it's Napoleon Bonaparte or whether it's New Testament or whether it is, no matter what it is, the sink of the Titanic, you name it, you just throw any historical event out there, and essentially historians, in order to reconstruct that, we look at primary sources, and there are basically three primary sources for any history at all. Number one is eyewitnesses. The second one is historical records or historical inscriptions, and the third one is archaeological evidence. And we have eyewitnesses in the New Testament. The New Testament claims to be written by eyewitnesses. And then we have historical records, which the New Testament, of course, I would say, and of course, I know other scholars would say, these are primary sources, in addition to others, of course, like Josephus and Tacitus and other historical sources as well. And then we have the archaeological evidence. And every year, I mean, archaeology is a fairly young science, and every year new things are discovered that really bring the scripture to life and really affirm that the New Testament writers were giving us accurate historical information. So I would say it this way, Bill, that archaeology is part of the cumulative overall case for the Christian faith. It, by in and of itself, it can't. Although, again, that question really hinges upon the individual. I mean, some people may be convinced by the archaeology, but I personally think that it's really part of a bigger case, including philosophical arguments, scientific arguments, and historical arguments that we can trust the gospel accounts, and that they're giving us accurate historical information, and that the archaeology backs us up. I'll give you two examples just off the top of my head with the New Testament. For instance, at a site called Caesarea, they're in the northern part of Israel on the coast. The Italian archaeologists working in the 1960s were actually excavating near an old amphitheater, and they discovered an inscription with a Latin writing on it, and it actually contained the name of Pontius Pilate. And this is the same Pilate. In fact, it says he was prefect of Judea. Now, the New Testament, of course, tells us that Pilate existed, but here we have extra biblical evidence in the archaeological record that Pilate existed. And Josephus, of course, mentions him as well. And then a few years ago, just about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, an archaeologist that working in the archives at the Israeli Antiquities Authority was basically looking through some old artifacts, and they found an old Roman signet ring that was excavated. I think it was, if my memory serves me correctly, I may be wrong about the exact date, but I think it was around the 1960s time frame. But it was excavated from a site near the city of Bethlehem, which is today in the West Bank. And that site is called Herodium, and that was built by Herod the Great. The significance of the ring is that the ring, they basically concluded, belonged to Pontius Pilate. So we have two artifacts belonging to Pontius Pilate, found by people not really setting out to prove or disprove the Bible, but these artifacts just come up every day. And another quick example is just a few years ago, they were working on a parking lot there in Jerusalem and discovered the edge of an architectural feature. That architectural feature looked kind of like a sidewalk or some steps. They ended up being the Pool of Siloam. And now the city of Jerusalem and the state of Israel are excavating the Pool of Siloam, and they're going to completely expose it. And this led to the Temple Mount, as the Jews would practice ritual purification in the first century. So all these things, I mean, we could just talk for days on end about the New Testament. So I think it really is part of an overall case that the New Testament is historically reliable, and we can trust the Gospels, that they're giving us accurate historical information.
Very awesome. One of my really becoming a close friend of mine, actually, my buddy Richard. His social media handle is the Faithiest Atheist, by the way. he's he's the nicest atheist I know. Like I mean,
Great, awesome.
he comes to Houston, we'll hang out for hours and talk. I want to have him here next year to do a debate with one of my buddies. But no, he asked a good question. He said, just concerning the resurrection of the saints and earthquakes and the solar eclipse outside of natural cosmic algorithms, wouldn't we be inundated by historians recording these events? Now, I have my answer for this. I mean, I've got one, but I wanted to see what you had to say about it, Ted, and maybe I might fill in a gap if you leave one or something. But go ahead there. Tackle it.
Wouldn't we?
Done this.
Well, I mean,
Good question.
that's yeah, it's a good question, but it's also an assumption. I mean, why would we be inundated? Why that? Because that's, I mean, it's like you got to put yourself in the people of the first century. Yes, they did record it. In fact, I don't have it with me. If I'd have known you were going to ask that question, I actually have it. There was a geologist working in the Dead Sea who actually found evidence of an earthquake centered in Jerusalem on one of the conservative dates for the crucifixion of Jesus, the very day, the exact day. This is called a Varv deposit. And I actually have the actual Varv deposit that's been actually encased in resin that shows the earthquake in 33 AD. That's one of the
Wow.
There are conservative scholars debate about the resurrection. So we do. I would just say we do have evidence of earthquakes and eclipses. There are, in fact, there's quite a few. I've got a book. I've got two books that specifically hone in on that. Jack Finnegan is an archaeologist years ago, lived in California. He's got an incredible book on biblical chronology, and he records all the eclipses that were recorded by Josephus and by other writers like Pliny and things like that. So I'm not sure exactly why he would say there would be a ton. I mean, we don't. The thing about it is, the further you go back in time, we don't have a lot of historical sources anyway. But the ones that we do, they actually do record solar eclipses and things like that. So that's my short answer. So I'm not sure exactly. I would have to drill into it a little bit more.
Well, you hit everything but the resurrection of the saints, and I can riff off that just for a second. You have to think of you have to think about the nature of the New Testament manuscripts, the nature of the storytelling in the New Testament, which I'm somewhat convinced that they could be Greco-Roman biographies, and at least I'm satisfied that they probably are, and especially I think it's in Matthew. I'm sure it's Matthew that talks about when Jesus died, the saints resurrected, and Greco-Roman biographies. First, we have to go all the way back to the Greek language. The Greek language doesn't have punctuation marks. The English language does. Like we have periods. We know what a period, question mark, and an exclamation mark is. For the Greeks, though, this is really interesting to me. When you read something like Caesar's Gallic Wars, for example, there will be some sort of monumental, strange thing that happens at the climax of the story. Well, it would, obviously the climax of the Gospels is going to be the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and the climax is not necessarily something that actually happened, but it's something that puts a marker in that story to say, like, this is the most important part. Pay attention here. And so,
Right.
What Matthew could have been doing there was using that Greco-Roman biography style to say, this is the thing you pay attention to. It's like it didn't really happen. It doesn't make it untrue. Didn't really happen, and it doesn't do any damage to the Gospels at all. It's just the way a Greco
Yeah.
biography works. And so when he's saying like even the saints and the dead rose again, and of course what was Jesus's message? Jesus was preaching the resurrection to people, and he was raised again. And it was, and you put all that together and say like, that's probably why only Matthew evens. I mean, I think a better question would be, if I could add to your skepticism, faithist, atheist, is why didn't other gospel writers write that either? You would think that would be something. Why didn't Josephus write about it? Why didn't Tacitus write about it? That's because if it's Greco-Roman in its biographical style, then that best
Yeah.
explains that. And and that's what you would expect from literature in that time. We tend to try to read the Bible through a modern lens, when it was written 2,000
Right.
years ago, and we're expecting it to be like this or that.
Right.
It's like so that's kind of my approach to it. But there's people that would disagree with that, and that's okay. But it doesn't do
Yeah.
any damage to the most important parts of Christian doctrine. And even and even if, like Ted said earlier, even if Matthew's account is completely wrong, we still know that Jesus rose from the dead, from the historical, the artifacts, the archaeology, all of that too. So,
Well, Bill, let me just say here. I personally, my view is I don't think it is Greco-Roman biography. I think it's historically exactly accurate. That's my view.
yeah,
But the problem is when you start going down that road, like I'm more of an Old Testament guy. I mean, not that I don't do work in the New Testament, but if you start going down that road, in the Old Testament, there's two approaches to the text. There's the comparative approach, and
mm-hmm,
there's the polemical approach.
mm,
Comparative scholarship looks at how much they are alike. And so when you take that approach, so the problem is if you start using that as a hermeneutical principle to interpret the New Testament, then did Lazarus not rise from the dead? Is
yeah,
that Greco-Roman biography?
yeah,
What about the miracles? I mean, are we going to take out all the miracles because it's trying to, why just the resurrection of the saints? And I don't know. I think it's kind of a dangerous, that's my own view. And
mm-hmm,
I do understand that, and I get it. I get the benefit of it. But just my own view is that I take it as historically accurate, that it actually really happened.
mm-hmm,
But I think, like you said, even if bracketing that issue, I think we have other compelling archaeological and historical evidence that the resurrection happened. We have,
yeah,
I mean, so many things that and again, it's a cumulative case. It's not any one thing that actually does it. So that's my view. But
yeah,
I would have to, well, that's what'd you say, the atheist?
yeah,
What's the guy's name?
atheist, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I'd like to just dialogue with him about it a little bit more to see
well,
what
sure.
the
Well, and as it goes for anybody on our Facebook page and our Facebook viewing audience, or even if you're on YouTube and you want to hop on Facebook Messenger and give my messenger a call at the end of this, we will have a call-in portion where the atheist is more than welcome to call in and dialogue some more about it. And I really hope, Richard, that you do. I'm calling you out, bro. So, um, so there you go. So, yeah, I offered that view because that is certainly a popular view right now, the Greco-Roman view. Think you mentioned Michael Icona earlier. He's really popularized that in a lot.
Yeah, I know Mike. I consider Mike a good friend, and
Yeah,
we just have a disagreement on that. But I love him, and he's a great defender of the gospel.
a-
So
absolutely. Well, and that's the wonderful
yeah,
thing about apologetics and doing this kind of academic work is we sit down long enough, we always find things to disagree on, but learning how to disagree charitably is, I think, a bit. It was
exactly.
like,
Well,
hey,
in archaeology, Bill, in archaeology is even worse. The
oh,
joke is in archaeology, like, if you got two archaeologists, you got 5 or 6 opinions between the two. So
right, yeah, yeah. So I mean, no, I was going to say, like, I am talking to a graduate research assistant of Dr. Norman Geisler, so I knew you were going to disagree with this. Man, like, not something that
But
normal.
no, I love Mike. He's a dear friend, and I saw him a couple of years ago at ETS, and we just he's a great guy. We go back a long time, and and I think you got to be charitable if you disagree with someone, and use grace, he's a brother in Christ, and there's nothing to break fellowship over about that. So. Um,
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think it's the single most important question in I think in the world really is who is Jesus, and really is he who he says he was. And
Yeah.
archaeology can give us a doorway to answering that question, because the New Testament is a historical document. I mean, we find people that are mentioned in the New Testament, like in the book of Acts,
Yeah.
Sergius Paulus, Gallio. I mean, all these like very minute Roman, like politicians. That their inscription will be found in Greece, and they're found by people not setting out to prove the New Testament. So that's, to me, that's even more of a compelling case, is when you have artifacts that are being discovered that are not being touted by, of course, people might say, oh, you guys are, biased with your discoveries. But many discoveries in archaeology were made by people not setting out to prove the New Testament or Old Testament one way or the other. So,
Yeah.
and there are many of them, actually, quite a few.
When I was doing my TA work down here, for instance, as far as connecting this to archaeology, I was teaching a intro to theology class with Dr. Talon and a couple other professors down here at HCU. And one of my lectures, in one of my lectures, it was kind of a foundational lecture, and we were looking through the early church creeds, and the Apostles' Creed even mentioned that Jesus was crucified by Pontius Pilate. And I challenged my students to think, like, why would the early church want to remember that Jesus was crucified by Pontius Pilate? I mean, this creed was not written until probably somewhere in the first century or second century. I mean, so why would they want to,
Really,
or maybe a little earlier than that? You think?
possibly, yeah, you're probably right. It's probably those some of those creeds go back pretty early. I think the creed. I think I know that Gary Habermas and Mike and some other New Testament scholars. I think it kind of the creed was really the core, that core creed. I forgot it. I think it was in Corinthians. Is it in Corinthians where that creed is?
You're thinking the 1 Corinthians 15 creed. I'm talking about just the apostle that
Oh, okay, okay, yeah. The Apostle Creed. You're right. That is second or third century. Yeah.
yeah. Why would why would the second, third century church want to remember something like this? That he was crucified by Pontius Pilate. And a lot of people read that every Sunday and never think of the implication. The reason for that is because that's like a historical marker to say that he was crucified by this Roman governor. And then for centuries, people thought, like you said earlier, well, who is this Pontius Pilate? What evidence do we have of Pontius Pilate? And it's just probably in the last, how many years? Probably, you'd know the years, I'd say the last 150 years at least. Maybe later than that we found.
Oh, yeah. I
We
mean, he was discovered in the 1960s. So
Yeah. So now everybody's
that
like,
would be
you know, oh, you froze.
absolutely, and that he's just one of many.
Right. Yeah. So much going on there. So, um, now what we want to talk about is discernment, which could be one of the greatest needs of the church worldwide right now. It's really scary to me when I'm overseas. I always use my cell phone as an illustration. I said, the biggest problem that the church has got right now globally is that everywhere I go, everybody has one of these things. They have access to
Yes.
YouTube. They have access to the internet. Some countries, I'm sure you've discovered this too. Some countries like that shouldn't have much better cell phone reception and data service than even the United States does. And it's cheaper, and people can sit on their phones all day long. Like in Kenya, you get 5G internet anywhere in the country, pretty much, out in the middle.
You're right, Bill. I was in Turkey. I've got better cell phone reception in Turkey than I do here in Chicago.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Yeah.
It's pitiful. Anyway.
Yeah.
Why aren't we up? My buddy was in Norway last year, and he said that, or a couple of years ago, and he said he could get cell phone reception in the middle of a mountain somewhere in a tunnel. He's like, why can't we do that? Can't even make it through a tunnel in the middle of a city with that. Anyway.
I was at 13,000 feet texting my fiance on Mount Ararat.
Yeah, so we have these powerful devices that can find anything we want on the internet, and some of it's good. I mean, I tell people, like, don't write off YouTube, don't write off these things, because there's good stuff on there. I mean, I'm a firm believer that, like, if you want to really reach the world, you've got to do what we're doing right now, and I can go over there and teach for a week, but I also can say now, Hey, and I've built this YouTube channel in the last year. If you want to go deeper in apologetics, I've interviewed many of these guys and gals, and you can learn all kinds of things. So it's a powerful tool, but there's also, for every one good video on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook Reels, whatever you want to call it, whatever platform you're thinking about, for every one good one, there's probably 10 bad ones. There's 10, just especially when it comes to archaeology. And now we're in the advent of ancient aliens and all this stuff. So it's like people are really confused about some of this stuff. So you've written about this. You've done a great job talking about it. So let's talk about this a little bit. Like you sent me this outline. We're just going to go through it. You were talking about, like, one of the big problems, not just with archaeology, but with news and everything else, is misinformation, outright false information. You put false in
Yeah.
apps. And so help us here. You do this as a science, Ted. You're looking at information all the time, and I'm sure you found discoveries in your lifetime that have just like been, wow, this is exciting. And then you look more into it and you're like, well, I wish it was true though. So there's got to,
Yep. Yeah.
not everything we
That's exactly
point to truth. So tell us about that. Walk us through, like, you find a video and it looks good, high production value and all this, but it's just not.
right.
But somebody like you,
Yeah.
why is that?
Yeah, that's so true. And yeah, you're right, Bill. And I got to confess, I have found things on the internet, and I posted them, and it ended up, I did a little bit more digging, and somebody would send me stuff, and it ended up being not true, or being, incorrect. So, I mean, what I want to kind of talk about is really an article that I wrote, because I would always get, and you can imagine an archaeology website, you're going to get a lot of questions, and people send me stuff all the time. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And so I decided to write an article called "A Quick Guide to Internet Archaeology." And so what we can do is really kind of go through a few of these principles that I laid out in this article. And if anyone wants the article, they can go to our website, epicarchaeology.org, and check that out. And I can give you the link, Bill, if you want to. We can post it on, below the video later. But basically, what I outline is really 5 principles. And the first one is what I basically lay out something called primary and secondary archaeological reporting. So, for instance, when you see something online, and mainly like Facebook or social media, you'll see some like clickbait title, like aliens have built the pyramids, or flying saucer found under the pyramids, or something like that. And so it's really good to know. People should know that there is a difference between primary and secondary archaeological reporting. So a lot of things that you see posted are very likely from a secondary source, or maybe a news source, or maybe a website that really focuses on archaeology. And there's nothing wrong with that, because in actuality, if you were to read an actual archaeological report, you'd be bored out of your skull. So a lot of people will post it and try to make it sound really interesting. But so what I did was, in the articles, I had kind of a takeaway, and the takeaway from in making the distinction between primary and secondary archaeological reporting is that people should keep out an eye for the original source of the excavation. Look, if you read an article about, no matter whether it's biblical archaeology or where else, when you're reading the article, try to keep an eye out for who was the university, who are the excavators. It's either going to be a university, or an archaeologist, or an organization. You're also going to look for academic sources, articles, field reports, or other kinds of scientific reports that really support the discovery. That doesn't mean you have to like do this every single time. But if it's really far out there, then you really want to think twice before clicking the share button. The second one is sort of it's gonna, people might laugh when they hear this, but try to avoid sensationalism, which I know it's like, that's kind of like, how can you ever do that? Because there's so much stuff out there that's sensational. But if you're going to post an article or look at an article, don't just post it because it sounds like wild. Take a step back and really think about it before you post it. And this is kind of an understatement in our culture because in order to get clicks, in order to get traction and likes, then you want it to have a kind of a zing to it. But with archaeology, you really want to take a pause, and this is just true for anything, whether it's really whether it's posting a website or an article that you read, or even watching a historical documentary on like History Channel or something like that. Um, so avoiding sensationalism, I say in the article, is a tricky because many unbelievers, many skeptics of the Bible would say that any archaeological thing that supports the Bible is itself sensational. So that it's sort of like, how do you define what's sensational and what's not? So, Bill, they would probably think that you and I are being sensational when we post, articles that support biblical truth. So people need to realize that archaeology is an ongoing science. We're always updating and refining and debating about certain subjects. So it's an ongoing thing. And the takeaway from the avoiding sensationalism would be this: use wisdom and discretion when posting about archaeological discoveries, which supposedly support the Bible, and take a second look. Hesitate from posting it because it sounds cool and supports what you believe. This is what we call confirmation bias. And I know that's a double-edged sword because, I mean, people may accuse me of that in our website, Epic Archaeology, that's confirmation bias. But I just want people to know that we Christians, we believers who are in this field, we are looking at this critically as well. And we realize that people may look at us as being biased, but we're trying to be as objective as we possibly can. And we want to encourage critical thinking. I think that's a good thing. To be, skepticism, if it's too far, is not good, but it's good to be a little bit skeptical. And so we want to avoid sensationalism if we can, and try to look out for the original source material.
Okay. Go on there, Ted. We've got 3 more things to go over, but let's look at just for a minute. Now,
Sure.
I've found skepticism has paid me a lot of dividends in my faith, because it seems like every time I'm skeptical about something and I start digging through the research, digging through the stuff, there's all the stuff out there. I mean, it's just so hard to weasel out of this whole Christian thing. And as an apologist, like, I'm skeptical of a lot of things, but I know what I believe and why I believe it, especially at this point in my life. So why do you think, it's kind of a loaded question because I think I know where you're going to go with this, but why do you think people would call a Christian sensational when they find evidence that would prove Christian beliefs? Do you think it's the bias, the naturalistic, materialistic bias that's kind of bred into our culture now?
Absolutely. I think you nailed it. I think people they assume materialism. They assume a materialistic, mechanistic, scientific sort of oriented universe. And so anything that, and also too, they have this knee-jerk reaction because they really very little have read the Bible, or they've read it out of context. And so they look at the Old Testament God as being very vindictive and very hateful and vengeful and things like that. So they're very emotionally charged. So whenever they see someone trying to defend the Bible, to them it may sound may look and sound very sensational. But I would just say, just look at the evidence. Try to be as unbiased. Look at this the way you look at anything else. At least consider the evidence. Consider the scholarship that is proposed. And there are some really amazing scholars out there that are doing work in archaeology and in anthropology and other fields. So, but I think that I think you nailed it, Bill. It's basically that people are committed to materialism and their naturalistic worldview, and so anything that smacks of defending an ancient document, that there's no objective truth at all. So that's I think that's probably where it's coming from.
So it'd be safe to say that there's an inherent kind of bias toward Christianity being true already bred into our culture. So it's thanks to a lot of post Enlightenment ideas and things. I agree with that. And so what I think, so what exactly, like, so could you give us a good friend of mine used to say, let's name the baby here. Like, what would be an example of a sensational piece of archaeology we find, like a sensational society
Okay.
video which you'd run across? If you ran across one in particular that you can, it's like, here's the definition. Like this video was like, ugh.
Well, yeah. I mean, let me. It takes a little bit of a background because I'm gonna focus on archaeology because that's in my wheelhouse. I'll use this as an example. Um, there are quite a few thousands and thousands of books on archaeology, and people are generally interested in biblical archaeology. I mean, the general public is. I mean, even though they may not believe in the Bible, I think people are interested in the subject of biblical archaeology. As is, whenever you have some historical documentary that comes out, people want to go see it. Like, the Exodus, even though it was terrible, I think the most recent Ridley Scott version, with Christian Bale, Batman playing Moses. But people are generally interested in it. So there are a lot of books out there, and so what people need to understand is that the people that are out there, the scholars that I would personally consider liberal or skeptical in New Testament and Old Testament scholarship or ancient Near Eastern archaeology, they would say that the Bible is historically fairly accurate in the Old Testament from about the time of David and Solomon, roughly speaking, all the way up into the Babylonian exile. Where it gets really controversial is anything before David and Solomon, when you're getting into the Exodus and you're getting into stuff like that. If in Christians, even among themselves, we have disagreement about the date of the Exodus. So that is already a contested field. But whenever you have a post where you, for instance, say you believe this is the Exodus Pharaoh and here's why, that is some people may think that's a sensational claim. But I would say that, consider the evidence on its own merit and look at the arguments in and of themselves and try to evaluate the evidence based on, the cumulative case. There's not any one thing that makes the case for X, Y, or Z being the Pharaoh. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you have to look at together. And then there are also assumptions about the text as well, about the nature of the text, the nature of the Old Testament, and the nature of the transmission of the Old Testament. So I would say a great example would be anything you say about the Exodus would be considered by most scholars that are in academic archaeology or Near Eastern scholarship, they might say that's sensational or that it's not founded on any good historical evidence. So that's one example. Another example in connection with that would be like, and I hear Christians do this, and I've got very dear brothers in Christ who are very passionate about it, but my own view is that it's like they're planting their flag on the wrong hill. Like, for instance, I'll give you one example. Where the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, that's another one. Like, there are guys that's all they talk about is that they just write books on it, like and I have an opinion about it too, but it's very speculative and it's really difficult because there are arguments. Everybody's got their arguments, and there's good arguments here and there's good arguments there. You would just need a lot of research to really make your case. And in archaeology, you're doing multiple seasons. I mean, you will spend about 15 or 20 years at a site doing an excavation. So all these questions are interesting, but they may be. I'm not saying they're sensational because the question interests me. But whenever you talk about the crossing of the Red Sea, where it is, and plant your flag there, that may be considered sensational, a sensational claim from some people. But then again, some people may say that the claims that we're saying in the New Testament are sensational. So it depends on the audience, and it depends on the person that is hearing the information. But I think if a person is really fair and will consider the evidence, I mean, I heard this story years ago when I was in Israel by Dr. Bryant Wood, who I've got the greatest respect for. He is one of the senior archaeologists at Associates of Biblical Research, where I'm an associate with ABR as well. I heard Dr. Wood say this years ago. And at night at the excavation, Dr. Wood and other scholars would give lectures, and he basically was talking about this idea about the cumulative case. And he actually has a background in engineering, and so some people may work in a factory, and you're, let's say you're making a widget, and let's say your factory is going to make 10,000 widgets in one day. Well, if you're working in quality control, you can't check every single widget. You have to check, every 10th or 12th or 20th, maybe 100, whatever. But quality control, every widget that you check is good. Then that means that you can pretty much trust that the rest of it is accurate. And Dr. Wood said that that's sort of the way it is with archaeology. Over the past 100 or so years, every time the archaeologist digs in the ground, we come up with evidence that supports the historical reliability of the text. So, as a cumulative case, I think there are good rational reasons why to trust the text. That it's giving us accurate historical information. We find people, places, cities, towns, geography, you name it. It's a reliable document. So that's kind of how I would answer that.
All right, cool. And of course, there's sensationalism on the other side too. I mean, the immediate thought I have is like ancient aliens and things like that. It's just purely speculative science. And
Absolutely.
I was heartbroken. I know you just got interviewed by the History Channel just this last week, but I was heartbroken when I talked to a pastor one time. He said that he swore that he swore to God the day he got saved he'd never read another book but the Bible. And that's step one of me rolling my eyes. And then later in the conversation, he proceeded to tell me about how all the great information the History Channel had been giving him, things that I'm like, well, how do you discern that? How do you discern that?
Yeah.
There's one thing I could suggest to him, and that would be maybe read some good books. But then we're back where we started. There's a lot out there, and I'm not convinced by most of it. Most of my undergraduate work was in history. I was almost had a history degree I was like halfway through my junior year before I dropped out. And then I came back to school after I got saved and did a theology degree. But a lot of this study is just discerning through history and things, like when we're looking at biblical narratives and things like that. All right. We have a few more to work through here. If we get time, I want to get back to the primary, secondary source material, because I'm preaching that gospel all the time. You have to check the primary sources. So, number 3,
yes.
Know the basics of how archaeology works. So, how does archaeology work? What's the
Absolutely
the absolute basic?
So basically, archaeology, simply put, is a study of artifacts. It's a study of the past through artifacts. History studies the past through text, through historical inscriptions, but archaeologists study the past through artifacts. An artifact is anything that's been made or modified by a human. I actually have a couple of artifacts with me, Bill, to show you. This one doesn't look like much, but it is a piece of pottery from the ancient Israelite site of Lachish. This is basically a rim shard, very wide rim of an amphora that dates to the destruction of Lachish from the Neo-Assyrians. And this one is actually from the late Bronze Age, from the site of Khirbet el Maqader that I excavated. It actually has scorch marks on it from the burning of the city of what we believe is the site of Ai, the biblical site of Ai. So archaeology is a study of artifacts, and so you basically need to understand that archaeologists basically are studying material remains, and they're basically interpreting those remains in light of science and in light of historical text. Historical text, if they can give us insight into the past, then that's great. And so there's actually a really good book that I recommend. I have a little copy with me here, a basic guide. You don't have to read this book, but it's really, really a great book by John Currid. It's called Doing Archaeology in the Land of the Bible by John Currid, Currid. You can get it on Amazon. It's a little paperback book, but basically Dr. Currid lays out exactly what archaeology is, what the process is. So essentially, the takeaway is that that archaeology can affirm. It can do three things. Archaeology can affirm the historical basis of the text. Archaeology can clarify the text, and archaeology can illuminate the text. And by affirming, I'm not saying prove as in like a logical deduction, but I'm saying that it can affirm, like for instance, if the archaeologist says that there was a battle that took place at this site, archaeology can find evidence of that battle if there in fact was a battle. So it can affirm or deny. And of course, with the denial, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So even if you don't find it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But the clarification and illumination are the other two things that it can do, and it's really an amazing thing. So know how archaeology works. At least know the basics of how archaeology works. You don't have to go and get your doctorate in archaeology, but at least know some basics about excavation. And it's a slow process. And at the end of the day, what all archaeologists want is publication. We want to publish our results. So I have so many people who have ideas, but archaeology is about artifacts. It's about looking at artifacts. And so until we have physical evidence, so for instance, I get all the time, where is the Ark of the Covenant? We may or may not have found it, but until we actually can produce an artifact, it's pure conjecture. We don't really have any idea until we have an artifact. So the takeaway for that is do some background reading about archaeology and the process of how archaeologists excavate and how they come to conclusions about their discoveries. And so as you do this, then people will begin to see a lot of the more hyped up claims and posts that are going around on social media. So again, just a sort of critical thinking. And the next one, if you want to go to the next one, is really not archaeology, but we have to talk about it, is theological commitments. Really, there's no getting around theological commitments. Even the atheist, their commitment is that there is no God. And so everybody brings their philosophical presuppositions to the table. The question is, are these presuppositions, are they rational, or are they defensible, and are they coherent? And there's a wide range of views when it comes to looking at the biblical text. There's radical skepticism. In fact, there's a whole school of scholarship called the Copenhagen School from Copenhagen, Denmark. These are called the biblical minimalists that originated in Denmark, and there's a few here in the United States. But essentially, they look at the text, the biblical text, as being completely devoid of any historical reliability whatsoever. So you've got that, and then you've got on the other side of the spectrum, you've got a very rigid, fundamentalist, overly literalism that really is very rigid. There's no nuance to it at all, and then everything in between. And so everybody has their theological commitments. The takeaway is that whenever you're looking at an article, read the fine print, in the article, and again, use critical thinking skills. But I would just say to be on guard. The takeaway is be on guard for phrases like, the Bible contains a historical kernel of truth, or illustrates a greater truth. There's a moral to the story, things like that. Again, this is my own personal view. That I would say try to post articles that affirm the historical reliability of the text and the integrity of the scripture before posting those. And then the last one is number 5, is the question of apologetics. And archaeology is just one small part of an overall case for the reliability of the New Testament and the truthfulness of Christianity. Again, my own view is that by itself, archaeology can't prove the resurrection, but it can certainly make a compelling case that we can trust the New Testament, where the Gospels record the resurrection. It's their witness. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. Obviously, there was an event of the resurrection, and then it was recorded, and then that is passed on. And archaeology can really bring us some really great clarification and affirmation that the New Testament is reliable and trustworthy. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. for my quick guide to internet archaeology. Again, there's a lot more to it. If people want the link, I can post the link below the comments.
I actually beat you to that a little earlier in the broadcast. The link is already
Did,
there.
great.
So yeah. So do some of these same principles? Do you think they hold true when you're, say, evaluating these historical documentaries and things like that, like on the History Channel or wherever?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Bill. And I have a personal insight into the History Channel as well, not to be mean spirited to the History Channel because they've been very good to me. I've been very blessed, and I'm going to be on this new program coming out this summer on ancient structures. But what I learned is that, and especially with the guy you were telling about earlier about how he watches History Channel and gets his history from that. What people need to understand is that with the History Channel and with any other Discovery Channel or whatever, it is very highly produced, and they already have the script pretty much written down. So they may have experts on it, but they're going to give you their slant on the question, whatever question they're exploring. Even the videos that I'm on, I'd agree to come on it, but I'm not really on these episodes talking about anything biblical per se. We're going to be talking about Stonehenge and the Easter Island, the Rapa Nui stone carvings called the moai. But they have a particular angle that they're trying to, and of course they have advertising dollars, they have commercials and ratings. So History Channel, be very skeptical of anything you see on that as giving the final say on any particular topic. There is a lot more nuance to scholarship, and there are 2 or 3 different other versions of what you see. So I would say you can use these same principles when you see a historical documentary on the History Channel for sure. Absolutely.
All right, good stuff, man. Yeah, I love it. Like you said earlier, we're kind of kindred spirits. I've been preaching this stuff since before I was a Christian. I'm like, man, you just can't trust.
No,
For my,
you can't. Even though I've been on it, I would even say you can't trust it.
yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
like you said, everybody reports history through a lens. It's hard to have objective, like purely objective history. I mean, it's all reported through some kind of lens. But we can agree on some the general narrative, the general facts, things like that. For instance, I think that we can all agree that the pyramids were mysterious and very miraculous. Just what a feat of mankind that was. That they would even build those, still standing today. Amazing. So how do we explain that? Well, it has to be something transcendent, probably aliens, because those people are just so inundated with astrology. So it must have been aliens. What's aliens like that? But for me, I think when people say something like that, what they're showing is that there is something in somebody's heart that just wants to reach toward the transcendent, reach beyond us somewhere. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not saying God built the pyramids either, but
Yeah.
but saying like that's what we tend when we tend to find something mysterious. It's almost like we have this need within us to explain it by something outside of ourselves. And so, thanks to as we talked about earlier, that materialistic bias, that's why you see things like ancient aliens. And I think the more you study, the scientism that we live in today, before
Yeah.
before scientism, like in this hard materialism arrived on the scene, aliens weren't what interested everybody. It was ghosts. And then kind of
Yeah.
ghosts are starting to take a back seat to aliens. There's always something out there in this mysterious, weird,
Mm-hmm.
that apart from God, people are trying to explain things that are unexplainable. But when
Yeah.
God's part of your worldview, then all of a sudden these things begin to make sense. There's C.S. Lewis was answering Hume in his great apologetic work, Miracles. He said, I paraphrase, he said, in a naturalistic framework, you're relying upon laws, certain laws, in the universe. And if that implies there's a lawgiver, and if this lawgiver is God, well, an interruption in these laws would be nothing more, nothing less than a miracle. I guess we'll have to call it that. It's like
Yeah.
a modest way to put it. It's like, yeah, there's miracles that happen, and there's no reason why we shouldn't expect some sort of evidence for these things. And so, going back to what you do, man, it's cool. Like you are, um, just as Kepler said, he's discovering God's thoughts after him. It's like you're discovering God's works after him. It's just really, really neat, man. It's really neat.
Yeah, the stories of the Bible they happened in history and space and time, and if they really happened, then you're going to see physical evidence of these stories. For instance, let me just go back to. I want to say one thing. Go back to before I share this about what you were talking about the pyramids and the aliens. The other, aside from, and I think you're right, Bill, about this transcendence thing. Where people just can't imagine humans building something as amazing as the pyramids. There's also this bias against human nature early in history that humans are just, we sort of evolved from these ape-like ancestors and sort of just we're like Neanderthals or whatever. And we drug our knuckles on the ground, and then we got smarter and our brains got larger But the further we go back in time, the more amazing things we see that humans could do. And the pyramids are just one of many, many. In fact, prehistorians there's a whole sort of revolution going on among prehistorians that humans are just incredible engineers really early in our history. And I was just on the History Channel talking about Stonehenge. Well, there's another structure in Turkey that's even thousands of years older than Stonehenge. It's called Göbekli Tepe. And now, according to traditional dating, it dates to 11,000 BC. And it is a monumental structure, these T columns with carvings on them. And the assumption was that at that time frame, humans were not basically, they're not agriculturalists yet. They're sort of transitioning from hunter-gathering to agriculture. Humans could not have built that, but humans have built it, and really early in our history. So there's this bias that humans are not really intelligent early in their history, and that's just false. It's just wrong. But to go back to your point about archaeology, this piece of pottery here may not look like much, but I'm going to hold up the camera there. You can see there under the rim there's a little black scorch mark. Bill, the story behind this is that according to the book of Joshua, the Israelites, after they defeated Jericho, they essentially marched around the site of Ai. Well, actually, they had a first attempt, but they couldn't defeat Ai because, of course, Achan. You may remember that story in the Old Testament. Achan actually stole something out of Jericho. He was told not. They were told to burn it and give it to the Lord as a burnt offering. Well, so finally they came to Ai, and the Bible says that Joshua basically stationed his army, his horse, from the north part of the gate, pointing out on a hill. He teased the king of Ai out of the gate, and then he split his army up. He had half his army behind the fortress, and then he had his other army to the front. So when the Canaanites came out of the fort to chase Joshua, the second part of the army came in to the site, and they burned the city, and they defeated Ai. This piece of pottery is burned from a sealed locus, Locus, from the site of Khirbet el Makader that was excavated quite a few years ago, and it's sadly it's been vandalized. But Scott Shipling was the dig director there for quite a while, and it was found, the site was actually discovered by Dr. Bryant Wood and another archaeologist named Gary Byers. And it was a debate among archaeologists as exactly where Ai was located. The Bible gives us exactly where to look. And when you look at the biblical description of Ai and the story of Ai, it's all there. And the archaeology backs it up. And this is a piece of pottery from it. So does it prove every single thing in the Bible? No, but it shows us that there is physical evidence that this story is actually true. And this is just one of literally thousands and thousands of pieces of artifact. And as more and more things come to light, of course, there'll be more evidence. But I'll finish with this, and then I know we may have some questions. I'll say this. There will never be enough for some people who are skeptical. There will never be enough evidence. There will never be that one artifact that people discover, that we discovered archaeologically, that's going to convince someone who doesn't want it to be true the will is just as much involved as the mind. And someone has to be open to the idea of the scripture being true and the gospels being true in order for them to accept it. But if they're closed about it, then no amount of evidence would ever convince a skeptic. Even if we found, I mean, one of the most intriguing artifacts in the world today, perhaps connected to the resurrection, is the Shroud of Turin. And years ago, when I was first on the History Channel, I was actually CNN. I did a documentary on this. I consider Gary Habermas, Dr. Gary Habermas, as one of the top experts on the resurrection. He's got his new books coming out, and he's written and knows a lot about the Shroud of Turin. So I was contacted by a producer, and I either emailed or texted Dr. Habermas and Gary, and the backstory on that was that years ago, he actually spent the night at my house, and we ended up down in my library for about 2 or 3 hours talking about the Shroud of Turin. So I called him and I say, hey, Dr. Habermas, they want me to interview me on the Shroud of Turin, but they need to interview you because you're the expert on this. And so he insisted that I should do it and told me about a book that I should get and a couple of articles I should read and things like that. But it's an amazing artifact. But and it's difficult to prove or disprove whether or not it's the burial cloth of Christ. But science can only go so far, and it can give us some really compelling reasons. But you also have to. So archaeology. I guess what I'm trying to say is that archaeology doesn't do away with faith. All science is sort of premised on faith. Even a physicist has to have faith that the laws of physics are true, and that all these things that they hold as assumptions in physics are true. So all that to say is that archaeology doesn't do away with faith, but archaeology, I would say, can strengthen faith and reinforce faith and give us reasons for faith. So that's kind of how I went in that.
Very good. Appreciate that, Ted. We do have our first victim, our first caller, one of my former alumni from HCU. Christian, before I bring him on here, though, this is an interesting part of this broadcast. We have the this feature now that we can take random calls. So if you hop on Facebook Messenger or some sort of a messaging service, if you're following me on social media somewhere and want to call in, you are welcome to do so. We can bring you live on the air, and you can join the truth conversation, as we call it. So we have our first victim here. Christian, can you hear us? You can. Well, nobody else can. Hold on just a minute, brother. I can hear you, but can everybody else hear you? That's the question. Give me just a second here. Let's see. Sorry, Christian. Just a second here. Works flawlessly 90% of the time.
Of course, the one time I'm calling, it doesn't.
There we go. Well, now it does.
Oh, so there we go. All right.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. So, Christian, what do you have for us, brother? Now, Christian's he's a former. What'd you get your bachelor's in here, buddy?
Biblical Studies.
Biblical Studies, HCU grad. Good to have you on the. Good to have
Awesome.
one of my fellow alums on the line here. So, Christian, what do you have for us, man?
So you're just talking about the Shroud of Turin, and I have some family members who are Catholic who really believe in it, and pretty much the only thing I have against it is that the average height of a Jewish man in the first century was about 5'4", if I remember correctly, and the man in the Shroud of Turin is about 5'10". So how would you explain that if it would be real?
The short answer is that the Gospels don't say how tall Jesus was. So you would have to assume that if Jesus was average, like the average height, but the text just simply doesn't say. It's completely silent on the height of Jesus. So it doesn't negate it at all. I think. But again, I don't put all of my eggs in the Shroud of Turin basket.
Mm-hmm.
I lean heavily. In fact, I'm correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, if you've heard this, but I know Gary and Dr. Craig on some days lean very heavily that it could be authentic. Although I think the case can be made for the resurrection that's that doesn't include the shroud.
I'm not sure that I've heard Dr. Craig say anything about it being authentic. I've never heard him talk about it. Neither have I heard Habermas. I know there's been some guys at Liberty that certainly, I think so Dr. Foreman, the late Dr. Foreman, late great Dr. Mark Foreman there, he was a believer in the shroud. And I've met some other people that, I've never been convinced by the shroud personally, but the more I've heard about it, the more I'm like, well, it's a possibility, but if I had to put a percentage to it, I would say it's like a 20% or something. I mean, I'm not. I'm on the low end of the spectrum on the shroud stuff, to be honest.
Fair enough.
Anything else, Christian?
I guess, do you have any advice for someone who's just starting out in like Facebook pages or whatever? I have a page on Facebook and I'm trying to start out, and either I get like 1 or 2 likes or I get ridiculed. So what's your advice for me on the internet?
Welcome to
what's it on? Is it on like a ministry, apologetics, or?
Yeah, it's on apologetics and theology.
Just be faithful, brother. Just be faithful and realize that here's the thing, you're gonna get some persecution and mockery. I would say mockery. I have people on a regular basis on Epic Archaeology that I have to actually block because it gets so bad. And so don't be discouraged if you get kickback like that. Just be faithful. And I really believe that God will grow your ministry if you're faithful to just present the truth, do it in love, be winsome, and be faithful, and just don't give up. Don't give up. Churchill. Today Churchill died. So I'm going to quote Winston Churchill. Never give up. Keep up the great work.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that, Christian, is that the reason I giggled is because I knew you. I know you. He's like, we've had this conversation. Yeah, it really is. Like, I've had a Facebook since before it was cool. I had it when it was in college. You had to have a .edu email address to use Facebook when it first came out. And I still use my .edu email address to log in. But it's, yeah, you always get pushback. I can put a question on something, on something I disagree with, and I open up my Facebook app on my phone the next day, and there's like 24 comments under it. Most people from ridiculing me, saying crazy things, and that's just the way it is on social media. But I kind of look at it like this. Like Ted said, sometimes you have to get rid of people. Sometimes you do have to block somebody or something, and that's unfortunate because I never want to block anybody. I want ministry to go out to everybody. But if they're being disruptive, sometimes you have to let them go. If they're not being disruptive and they're challenging you and it's causing conversation, though, it actually brings more attention to that post and thus your ministry and things. And honestly, if you're doing gospel ministry and not making somebody angry from time to time, I wonder what kind of ministry you're trying to do. As long as it's not your fault and it's just the fault of the truth itself, it's making them angry.
Yeah.
So yeah. Great question.
Well said, Bill. Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.
Yep. Thanks, Christian.
You too. No problem. Have a good night.
You too, man.
Right.
I love this feature. That's just so fun that you can just have people like that. Hope we get another caller, but I call one a win. Now we're just getting this off the ground. And honestly, I've never seen a podcast that allows you to do that, but
that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's cool. So anybody else out there, I can see on my screen that we do have 11 viewers. Don't be shy. If you have a question, you can either put it in the chat right now and we'll get it and we'll, just like we did with the Faithist Atheist earlier, we'll answer it. And if somebody put on the chat, better an hour late than never. My buddy Dave just got on. I know who Dave is. All right. Awesome guitarist guy. He's a regular.
Awesome.
But yeah. So, but if you have any questions for an archaeologist that is a regular on the History Channel and things, like, now is your chance. Don't let it pass, you know. But if there are no more questions, we can close her down in just a minute. As we're waiting for another call, and listen, you don't have to wait until a break in the conversation. Just like what we did with Christian there, he called in, and we have it muted until we bring you into the conversation. So feel free to call, and we'll get you on here in just a minute. But if we don't get any other callers, we can just close with this. I found it really interesting. I ran across one of your articles on your website, and there are many on there. But one that stuck out was Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And it's one of those things that I never really realized that there's a little bit of truth in some of these Indiana Jones tales. And
Yeah.
and in this case, it was actually there's a little bit of truth in this new Indiana Jones movie. Maybe you'd want to talk to us a little bit about the Antikythera?
That's right. Yeah, that's right, Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of the I'm sort of I love the connection between old Hollywood and archaeology and history, and if I could share this really interesting little tidbit of Hollywood trivia, Bill. So Bill, have you seen the movie old version of the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston?
Yeah. No, I've seen the Charlton Ten Commandments. Yeah, I sure have.
Okay, so interesting thing about that. So when Charlton Heston comes down as Moses with the Ten Commandments,
Mm-hmm.
those Ten Commandments were actually translated. That was the latest understanding of the Hebrew language by the famous American archaeologist William F. Albright. Cecil B. DeMille, the director of the Ten Commandments, was a really big biblical archaeology history buff, and was good friends and actually interacted with William Foxwell Albright, who was a very famous American biblical archaeologist, probably considered to be the father of American biblical archaeology, William F. Albright. But yeah, the Indiana Jones movies all are based, or they're centered around an actual artifact, even including the Holy Grail. No one's ever found it, but in any case, this latest movie, The Dial of Destiny, was based on an actual artifact discovered in about the turn of the century, last century rather, called the Antikythera mechanism, that was found by Greek sponge divers. It was turned out it was a Greek shipwreck, and it was an artifact that was a big clump of metal, and it actually had gears in it, and that scholars spent many years until technology was advanced enough where they could actually see the gears inside of it, and it's possible that it was an astronomical device meant to predict the movements of the lunar cycle. Hipparchus of Rhodes, possibly. Cicero writes about this. We know that Cicero studied at Rhodes. So it wasn't a time machine, but in a sense, all archaeology is like a time machine in that it takes you back to the time in which it was built. But in this latest movie with Indy, of course, you can turn it back and go back in time. That's what the Nazis were trying to find it for. But it is based on an actual historical device called the Antikythera mechanism. And in the article, they have people who've actually, based on the scholarship, have recreated a replica of the Antikythera mechanism. So fascinating device, and really interesting bit of history. The takeaway in the article, one of the things that I think is an interesting irony about that is that archaeology is very close to intelligent design in the sense that we infer design from artifacts, and an artifact is anything that's been made or modified by a human. We can discern an artifact, like for instance, we know a rock that's naturally made through natural processes. We also know what an arrowhead is. An arrowhead or projectile point was made by a human. So this artifact of the Antikythera mechanism, it was about the universe, about predicting the heavens. And the irony is that even the heavens themselves, even the earth and the stars and the galaxies, is that an artifact? And I think that it is. And obviously, I think it's a good argument for God's existence. So, kind of it's little interesting connections there that I make in the article. It was really fun. I really wanted people to see that it was really based on an actual artifact, because I think the real artifact of the Antikythera mechanism is just as interesting as Indiana Jones. I just love it. Love it. It's fascinating.
No, that is pretty cool. Yeah, it's neat. It's always neat to say to think like, all right, so there's a little bit of truth in here, so that's pretty neat. And that's what makes the best stories are the ones that are circled around truth in some way or another.
Absolutely.
Have a
Yeah.
We do have a question from a fellow YouTuber, Seek and Find, that says, which is a cool channel if you guys want to check that out. Seek and Find, obvious Christian connotation. Let me read this here. What about? Hope I don't destroy this word. What about Quirinius census? How can we know Luke was right, and did he contradict Josephus? Those are some niche questions, but we're about to, that's more like history than it is archaeology. But what do you think of it? Is there some archaeological history
Yes.
for all this stuff? What do you think?
Yes. I actually wrote an article on it. So was the census of Quirinius? The Quirinius was the governor of Syria, and there's actually a couple of
Sorry to interrupt you. As soon as I said that, I was like, oh no, this is one of those biblical words. Or like one of those ancient words. I'm about to kill it. But say that again.
No, Quirinius.
Okay. I learned something tonight.
A lot of these Greek and old Roman names are really difficult. I know.
All the time. Okay. Quirinius. There we go.
So the short, I actually have an article on it on Epic Archaeology. If people go to epicarchaeology.org and click on blog, there's actually an article where I dig into it a lot more in detail. But it's basically, there's several different ways to answer it, and I talk about several solutions. And you may read this in books in different ways, but give me 1 second here, and I'll find it in because it's based on there it is, the census of Quirinius in Luke 2. So essentially, what I do in the article is I actually list one of the biggest objections was by a Jewish scholar by the name of Emil Schurer in his chronological in his book on the Jewish people. And so basically, Schurer states that Luke's account can't be accurate history because nothing is known in history of a general census in the time of Augustus. Number two, in a Roman census, Joseph would not have had to travel to Bethlehem, would have registered in the principal town of his residence. Mary would have not had to register at all. Number three, no Roman census would have been made in Palestine during Herod's reign. Number four, Josephus records nothing of a Roman census in the time of Herod. Rather, the census of 86-7 was something new among the Jews. And number five, a census held under Quirinius could not have occurred during Herod's reign. So what I do in the article is, because of space, I attack two of these objections. Number one, the claim that nothing is known in history of a general census during the time of Augustus. And this is about the Roman Caesar Octavius Augustus. He was the one who succeeded Julius Caesar. And number two, that in the Roman census, Mary and Joseph would not have had to travel to Bethlehem. Both of them are answered. The simple answer to objection one is that there was indeed a census during the time of Augustus. In fact, there were several census taking. This was a common practice among the Romans because they, wanted to keep track of of course, the people that they ruled over. And there's a quote here that I have from a New Testament archaeologist who's basically said that as to the taking of such an enrollment in general, it is known from discoveries among Egyptian papyri that Egyptian census was taken in Egypt and therefore perhaps all throughout the empire regularly every 14 years. Many actual census returns have been found archaeologically. In fact, the same Greek word that Luke uses in Luke chapter 2, verse 2 for enrollment was discovered in Egypt on these papyri. The specific census, which mentions in Luke 2, is Luke qualifies it. Luke, in fact, is very precise. This is the first one that took place while Quirinius was governing Syria. We also know from the Roman historian Tacitus and Josephus when Quirinius died around AD 21. And so in the article, I dive into it a little bit more in detail. And for time's sake, of course, we don't have to get into it in detail right now. But there's actually some inscriptions in Roman in Latin, actually, that actually may contain the name of Quirinius himself when he would have reigned or when he would have been governing Syria. So the short answer is that yes, there are any number of ways to answer the census in Luke chapter 2.
Didn't realize that you had written on that, but that was very thorough.
Yeah, and it's even much more thorough in the article because it gets into a lot of details of Roman history. But a general principle, Bill, if I can just insert this one quick thing, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because we haven't found something yet doesn't mean, and now it's not like, begging the question, but that's just the nature of archaeology. Archaeological, we haven't found, in fact, just to give you an example of how much we don't know, we already know a lot of stuff already, and it's amazing. But in 2016, this is in Egypt, this is just in Egypt. There was an archaeologist, a female archaeologist in Birmingham, Alabama. Her name is Sarah Parchek, and she teaches Egyptology at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. And she won the 2016, I think it was the 2016 TED Prize. So you've heard of the TED Talks?
Yeah. So that wasn't your.
So basically, she won the 2016 TED Talk Prize, right, and she got $1 million. And with her money, she started something called Global Explorer. And with Global Explorer, what it does is it actually utilizes crowdsourcing with satellite imagery to discover new archaeological sites in Egypt. Also, to keep a track on looting, because a lot of sites are looted in the ancient Near East. And over just a period of a few years, the survey work in the Nile Delta yielded a potential of 10,000 new unknown sites in the Nile Delta, just from this, just from the survey. That's just in the Nile Delta that have not even been excavated yet.
Yeah.
So the critics are a little too, it's there's more. I'm not saying they're going to find everything. What I'm saying is that as time goes forward, we'll expect to see more things. It wouldn't surprise me a bit.
Yeah, and historically speaking, too, that was a lot of skeptics, a lot of skeptical arguments a couple of hundred years ago don't even hold up because of what we call in apologetics, the archaeological boom of the 19th century. Was the 19th century? I think so. It was 1800s. There's just a archaeology, and a lot of the things, like people, there's a time in this country where people doubted the validity of King David, for example. And thanks to archaeological discoveries, they're like, nope, like you were wrong about that. So,
that's the Tel Dan inscription that was discovered in, I believe it was in the 90s by Tel Dan in northern Israel from the House of David. And there's others as well that are contested readings, but they doubted. These are the biblical minimalists who doubted whether to temper that skepticism. So it's an exciting field to be in.
Yeah, sure. Well, this is your last chance to either give us a call in or leave a question in the comments somewhere. I can see the comments on it. That's what I mean by chat, because it calls it chat on my software. Sorry about that. But somebody actually sent me a text and said, I'd love to ask this question, but I have no idea where to put it. Oh, I meant put it in the comments. That's what that means. So if you want to leave something in the comment for us, we've got, we're at 8:30 right now, which is when we cut off normally, but we want to make sure. I know Ted's a ministry-minded person, so if there's a question burning on your heart, don't be afraid to call in on Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, or whatever you may be connected to me with, or leave a question. If not, we will go ahead and close it out. Ted, is there anything that you'd want to leave us with tonight?
Just thanks for having me on, Bill, and keep up the great work, brother. Thank you for people can check us out. Go to epicarchaeology.org. We're also on Facebook, so just type in Epic Archaeology and follow us on Facebook. And hope to be producing some new videos this coming spring, summer. One of the things that I'm going to do a video on it's a common objection, and I'm going to really take some time to really tackle this head on, is the Spider-Man fallacy. I don't know if you ever heard of that, Bill. The comic book, well, just because the Bible, it's a criticism about biblical archaeology and finding cities and people. The criticism, the critique is basically that, well, yeah, I mean, they wrote books like Spider-Man, and we found things that are referenced in Spider-Man, but Spider-Man's not real. So why would we believe a Spider-Man comic book because it's talking about an actual city? So I'm gonna answer that and try to put that to rest.
Certainly a fallacy. That's a good word for it. Great titles. Yeah. Fallacy. Well, thank you guys for hanging out with us tonight. Thank you, Ted, for being on here. I appreciate your time's very valuable, sir, and appreciate you.
Thank you.
And just everything you're doing. It's just so awesome to talk to people that are, it's guys like Ted that guys like me. I just get to read books about archaeology, and here's Ted over there with a shovel and a brush and like unearthing this stuff. And it's always interesting to hear people that are in the middle of this, hands-on in the middle of the field. And we really do appreciate you being on here tonight, Ted. It's awesome to have you.
Thank you. A great honor for me to be here, Bill. And thank you for all the work that you do, brother.
Hey, man, I appreciate that. Keep praying for us. I know you do.
I do. Yes.
All right, buddy. All right. We'll be sure to have you back on soon. And
sounds good.
If you guys like what you're seeing, hit the subscribe button. And next week we're going to have my friend Israel Wayne's going to be talking to us. I have his book over here somewhere. Here it is. Going to be talking about Foundational Truths, a Modern Catechism. Goes through a lot of the major doctrines of the Bible in several pages. It's going to be really cool. And a couple of weeks after that, we'll have Holly Pivick and Doug Gavitt on here talking about their work in the NAR movement, New Apostolic Reformation, and the hypercharismatic Pentecostal conundrums that have followed that. And so we've got a fascinating next couple of weeks. So stay tuned. We will try to be on here every Wednesday night, except for in February, Valentine's Day night, for obvious reasons. So be on here. So you can always find us on here and listen. If this broadcast touched you in any way, if this piqued your interest, don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us and on Facebook or social media, or shoot an email or something. We're on the internet, so find us. We'd love to talk to you further. For us, this is a ministry, and it's an opportunity to reach out to people. So thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for following. Share this video around if you think the information is valuable, and help us to continue to grow. I'd love to see us by next week reach 300 viewers. We're at 291 right now. So subscribe and be part of the first 300. So thank you guys. God bless. We will see you next week on The Truth Conversation.